everyone, this is Katie with Katie Loves Classic Books, and I'm here today with my November wrap-up. So, the first book I read in November was Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb, which was published in 1998, and I gave this 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. So, this is the first book in a trilogy called the Live Ship Traitors trilogy, and it's the second series in like this large overarching series that Robin Hobb has created called The Realms of the Elderlings. So, in the past few months, I was reading the first trilogy in this kind of overarching series called the Farseer trilogy. If you've been watching my videos, I'm sure you heard me talk about those books, and I absolutely loved them. Such a wonderful fantasy series, and I feel like Robin Hobb is just a master storyteller and creator of character in particular. And so this is the second series in the big series. Although it's like really not very connected to the first series, so as far as I can tell, you could read them separately, but I wanted to read them all in order. They don't follow any of the same characters. It's set in a land that borders the kingdom that was followed in the first trilogy, which was cool to see like a different area. But yeah, they weren't super linked up so far. So the world in this book seems a little different because this series follows seafaring people. So we follow these families of traders, and also even some pirates, which was exciting. And the center of the magic in this book were live ships, which are these ships made from this special kind of magic wood, and when 3 family members have died on board the family's ship, it becomes alive. And that was a really cool element of this story. So I enjoyed this one. I love the Farseer trilogy, and I was kind of sad to get away from those characters, but it took me longer, but I did fall in love with this story and this part of this magic world and these characters. And I thought not only did Robin Hobb do a fantastic job with the characters in this book, but the world building was super fantastic because I just felt like it was kind of different. Like, I haven't heard of other fantasy novels set in a seafaring world, and I just thought that was really cool, and it really came alive and seemed so vivid. And I loved the ships that were alive, and the sailors and the pirates, and there were sea serpents and just lots of cool things. So this book was written in a different perspective than the Farseer trilogy. The Farseer trilogy was written solely from the first-person perspective of a character named Fitz, which I loved, and I still felt like I got such a well-rounded view of the other characters, and I miss Fitz, to be honest. I can't wait to read Fitz's perspective again. But this was written in the third-person perspective, but following different characters. Which is really cool because I feel like I got to know more characters in this book and see different sides of things. And yeah, so the characters were super fantastic in this book. While it was very fun to read and all of that, it did tackle some serious topics, like the topic of slavery was really big in this book, and that's a difficult topic to handle and to read about even in a fantasy world, so that was interesting. I feel like this explored like certain issues in the world's like own past, because this kind of society in this part of this magic world kind of dealt with some things we had dealt with before, like slavery and like gender roles, like the more traditional gender roles we're used to. And in the Farseer trilogy, the world seemed a little bit different. Like, for instance, gender roles were a bit different and whatnot. And I didn't hear about slavery, except I think people who came from this part of the land. So interesting. And yeah, and the characters I adored again. It largely followed this one family called the Vestrip family, and then kind of people that come into contact with them eventually, I guess. Maybe that'll more wrap up a little bit better in the other books. One character that almost seemed like the main character in a way was a daughter of the Vestrip family called Althea, and she grew up on her father's ship, and she really wants to captain the family ship Vivacia once she quickens and becomes alive, because she's a live ship. And things don't work out so well for her, and we kind of follow her journey. And I enjoyed her a lot. I mean, she was kind of stubborn and had some like difficult qualities, I guess, but I just really liked her fierceness and her spirit, and it was hard not to sympathize with her. And then there was a man named Brashen who worked on Althea's father's ship. I think he was the first mate, and then it follows him, and he kind of sails on some ships with Althea, or a ship with Althea at one point, and he was an interesting character. I liked him and Althea's relationship to each other, and I can't wait to read more of that, hopefully. And then it followed, well, kind of, I don't know if there was a section from his point of view, but kind of one of the characters that I disliked, although of course I was supposed to, was a man named Kyle, and he is married to Althea's sister, and he ends up becoming the captain of the family ship Vivacia. And yeah, he was not such a great character, and you know, I love to hate him, or whatever you would say. Very interesting though. And then his son Wintrow was a great character. Wintrow was studying to be a priest and ends up having to work on his father's ship, and it was really interesting to see his journey. It was really rough at times, but he had such I don't know, his sections were like really wise, and the things he had to say were really wise and spiritual, and I really enjoyed that. Like, I wrote down a few books or quotes from this book, and they were pretty all from Wintrow's perspective, because he's just like very wise and has an interesting perspective on life for one so young. And then we also follow another of Kyle's children, Malta, and she's like back on land with her mother and grandmother, and as she grows up, and she makes some poor decisions, and she seems kind of, I don't know, spoiled in a way, I guess, very immature, but I'm really fascinated, though, to see how she grows up. And then there was a pirate, Kenneth, who was very interesting. Not really a very likable character. I don't think he's that nice of a guy, but yeah, he kind of like accidentally falls into doing some good deeds. Like, he becomes a pirate that captures slavers and frees the slaves, although I don't think he does this out of the goodness of his heart, but it's just like really interesting what he does, I suppose. And then there's this prostitute that's kind of his woman named Ida, and she kind of becomes a more powerful character as the book goes on, and fascinated to read more about her. And then there are the live ships themselves, which are super fascinating. So is the Vestrit family ship called Vivacia, and I loved her and can't wait to read more about her. And then there's also the ship that I was very fascinated by named Paragon, and he kind of has been tied up in the harbor for a long time, and he has been through, I don't know, something terrible, and his family all died on board him, and there's kind of this vague mystery surrounding him, and I can't wait to read more about him. Oh, and this woman named Amber, too, who kind of befriends him, was interesting as well. And I feel like she's going to play a bigger part later on. Anyway, so many characters to talk about. Sorry, I just went on a whole tangent there, but there's just so many characters this book follows that are so interesting, and yeah, so I just really recommend Robin Hobb. She just writes wonderful fantasy, wonderful world building, and most of all, she does characters so wonderfully, and she just keeps you hooked. She really is a master storyteller, like I said. Yeah, and like I said, I don't know if you need to read this trilogy um, after the Farseer trilogy. I super recommend the Farseer trilogy though, so I would just read it. But if this particularly appeals to you because of the seafaring world and all of that, I bet you could read it in its own right. I mean, I'll keep you updated as I read the other two books in here. I kind of have been reading like one a month, so I bet in like 2 months' time I'll have finished the trilogy. Anyway, so I just really enjoyed this, and I actually think tonight I'm gonna start the second one, so exciting stuff. The second book I read in November was Tarzan of the Apes by Edgar Rice Burroughs, and this was first published in 1912 in a pulp fiction magazine. And I gave this 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. So it was really interesting to read the book that inspired all the Tarzan films, you know, the classic ones, as well as the Disney version, which I grew up with, and I'm sure many of you did as well. Yeah, so if you don't know, this starts out with a man named John Clayton and his wife Alice, and John is sent to Africa on some like political business, and on their way there, on the ship they're on, some drama happens, and they are dropped off on a lonely shore of Africa all by themselves, and nobody ever comes to get them. So they forge a little life for themselves, and eventually they have a baby, Tarzan, and but then they're eventually killed, and after they are killed, an ape named Kala, who has recently lost her own baby, finds Tarzan and kind of brings him up as her own. And then Tarzan grows up in this world of apes, but is also curious about his human origins and his connection with civilized society, first through learning and then through direct contact with people from England, which would be like his home native country, I suppose. So, first of all, there were like a lot of there was like an interesting theme or themes in this book, although I really don't know what Edgar Rice Burroughs was really going for by showing all this stuff, or if he really meant anything, but I found it interesting. Like just a lot about the origins of man, I guess, and how far he's come and stuff like that. Like there's like a scientific side that I kind of saw, and even like a biblical side I kind of saw. So the scientific side, obviously Tarzan is brought up by apes, so that kind of goes with, you know, the theories of evolution, that humans are descended from apes, and then he comes in contact with the native people, and then with like civilized people, so this kind of progression of man almost. And he almost goes through that himself. He almost goes through like the evolution of man himself. And but then also his parents, in a way, like in like a more biblical sense, are almost like an Adam and Eve, because they're almost like the first man and the first woman, and like fending for themselves in the wild. I don't know, at least I kind of felt like it was described that way. So I found all these things really interesting. I'm not sure what he was going for with all of that. Maybe kind of showing us how in some ways humans have not changed, in what ways they have, kind of the tug of war between like humans like primal desires and instincts and way of life versus like the civilized way, like what is good in like the wild primal nature of man that maybe we shouldn't forget, and yet the good parts of civilization and learning and like enlightenment that can come from all the knowledge and whatnot in civilized society. So that was really interesting. I don't know, maybe I didn't expect that. Like I said, I don't really know where he's going with it, but I found it fascinating. I mean, overall, this was like an adventure story. And while it wasn't like, it definitely was not a mindless like adventure story just for the thrills. Like I said, I found there to be a little bit more behind it than that. I didn't love this because there were parts that were too adventure-y for my taste, and just little episodes and whatnot that I feel like did not advance the plot. It was just for the thrills, and that's not really necessarily my cup of tea. There were some problematic things in this book, I will say. I mean, I always kind of expect that in classics. Sometimes it's not so bad, and then sometimes it's worse. So it's maybe veering on the slightly more difficult side because there was a lot of it, pretty much around race and a lot of separation between whites and blacks and whatnot. And I don't know if he meant any of it maliciously. A lot of the time it felt like he was just stating things, but I don't know. It was problematic though. So, if you were interested in reading this book and something like that would really bother you, yeah, I would keep that in mind. So there's that. I liked the characters, but I think I wished more from them. Like, Tarzan was interesting. I rooted for him and Jane because, I don't know, I grew up with the Disney movie and all that. How can you not root for Tarzan and Jane? Yeah, I wished more from both of them. And from their relationship, I mean, it was kind of weird because it was super duper insta-love. And also, the ending wasn't necessarily what I desired, although it was okay. And there are other Tarzan books. This was the first in a series. And, I already know, it's going to be resolved. And everything between Tarzan and Jane will be just fine. But still, it was kind of a weird ending. But, all of the characters seem like caricatures, in a way. I don't know. It works sometimes. In the case of Jane's father, Professor Porter, he kind of became comedic relief almost. He was kind of funny in the way he was portrayed. I will say, while Jane and Tarzan's relationship, I rooted for them, but I wished more from it, really, more depth. I will say that the exploration around Jane was kind of interesting too, because with her, we see a woman's tug of war between her primal desires and then the conventions of society and the civilized world. So I liked that quite a lot. That was interesting. Yeah, so overall, I don't know. I didn't love this, but I did find it quite interesting, and I am glad I read it. So yeah, if you have any interest in reading the book that inspired all the Tarzan movies and all that, then I somewhat recommend this, as long as you're knowing that there's some problematic stuff and all that. But it is interesting. Like I said, some interesting exploration, a little bit deeper than just an adventure story, but it does get a bit adventure-y. Yeah. Like I said, it's part of a big series, and while I wanted to see resolution between Tarzan and Jane, I really don't want to pick up the other books in this series. This was enough for me. I read the synopsis of the next one, and it was so strange and all over the place. I was like, you know what? I'm good. So yeah, this was interesting though. The third book I read in November was The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafon, who's a Spanish author, and this was published in 2001, and I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, and I'd give it 1 billion if I could. So this was definitely my favorite book of the month, and a new favorite book, and I just adored this so much. Oh my gosh, it was just so fantastic. So the book starts out, so it's set in post-war Barcelona, and it starts out following a boy named Daniel, and one day his father takes him to a place called the Cemetery of Forgotten Books and tells him he can pick out only one book and he must cherish it forever. So he does, and he picks out a book called The Shadow of the Wind by Julian Carax. And as Daniel grows up, he loves this book, but he becomes obsessed with finding out more about the author and his life. And he becomes more embroiled in his life and the mystery surrounding his life. And their lives almost parallel and intersect and whatnot. And there's quite a mystery around the author's life in Daniel's time, because somebody is going around and burning all the copies of his books. And so Daniel's wondering why that's going on. And there are kind of stories within stories in this book. So on one level, it is Daniel's life and what's going on in his life, and him, becoming obsessed with this author. And then on another level, it is about Julian Cracks himself in the past, and the people associated with him, and it kind of all comes together and kind of all the little mysteries are cleared up, and and everything starts to make sense. So I'll start off by saying, I don't know how interesting that sounds, but regardless, this is a book that is what a novel should be. It is a perfect work of art within the form of a novel. It's just breathtakingly beautiful. The story is so engrossing, you forget, I forgot about, everyday life. This was a book that I lived. I feel like there are books, maybe I've said that before. There are books that, I read, and then there are books that, I live. And this was a book that I lived, and such a wonderful story, so fascinating, you get so sucked in, so beautiful. It was beautifully written and translated as well, because this is translated, so for me to say it's beautifully written, good job on the part of the translator. It was so vivid, it had this cinematic quality, and I just felt like I was in Barcelona in this time period, and just everything about it. The setting had such a feeling, such an atmosphere, and very vivid, very beautiful. And this was a book that didn't just engage my mind, it engaged my heart. This is a book that I felt, if that makes sense and doesn't sound too sappy. But all the feelings in this book, and there's a lot of them, are so palpable. Everything about it was so palpable, really. And I just felt this so much, and it left me hungover after reading it, and just feeling all the feels. And it was just really magnificent. So this is pretty much a book that it's about the power of reading. It is about our connection to books and to the people who wrote them. It is about love very much. There's so much about love and love stories in this, about desire, about obsession even in a way, about loneliness and loss. And not making the same mistakes as those before you, or trying to have what they didn't get to have. Running after the life you want with arms wide open, and embracing all the passion and the love that you have while you have it. And it was just so beautiful. I don't think I can stop saying that. The setting of this book was interesting. I didn't realize, Spain had gotten over a civil war at this time, and while it's not too much about the actual situation of the country, that is kind of tied into some of the characters' lives and situations, and the tragedy surrounding that, and the difficulties in the country at the time. So that was interesting. So something I didn't know before. The characters I cared so much about, and they were all so interesting and lovely and wonderful. And Daniel I rooted for so much, and Julian, and just how it all ties up together was great. And yeah, this isn't a mystery novel, but yet there's a mysterious quality to it. You want to keep reading, you want to untangle the mysteries of these characters' lives and their tragedies and their triumphs, and the sadness and the beauty surrounding it all. And it does have a very satisfactory conclusion, and it kept me hooked. And this book is so tragic and so sad at times, and yet at the end you get a feeling of happiness and redemption. It doesn't end badly for everybody. Um, yeah. Um, so I don't think I have anything else to say about this book, but I adored it so much. It was beautiful, so beautiful. And if you have not read this book, I'm sure around the time it came out and the years following it, that a lot of people picked this up. I think because it was about a book and an author, just it appealed to a lot of readers of all sorts of genres. So I know that this is a book that many people have read, and I've heard it kind of hyped up, although maybe I haven't heard about it recently because maybe everyone's read it already except for me. But if you haven't, just know this book is gorgeous and beautiful, and it will make you feel so many things, and it is exactly what a novel should be. So bravo, Carlos Ruiz Zafon. I'm glad you have written this book because I loved it so much. So this is like kind of loosely in a series, as like there's a couple other books I believe that are kind of tied into this one a bit, and I am dying to read them because I love this so much. So you'll hear about those soon. I think there are two more that have been translated into English, but there is then a third one that has been published in Spanish but not in English yet. So anyways, so look out for reviews of those because I think will be checking those out because this was gorgeous, so gorgeous. The fourth book I read in November was Mr. Blandings Builds His Dream House by Eric Hodgins, and this was published in 1946, and I gave this 2 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. So this is a comic novel that follows a man and his wife as they try to build their dream house, and they run into many unforeseen circumstances, and it ends up costing them a lot more than they realized. But sadly, I was disappointed in this book. So I picked this up because there's a cute old black and white movie that was based on this, and starring Cary Grant and Myrna Loy. And it's just really cute and funny and charming, and I enjoy it. And so when I realized it was based on a book, of course, I was like, okay, I'll pick it up. But this did not have the charm of the movie, I'm afraid, and it was not necessary for me to read this. I didn't really get that much out of it. So it doesn't really have the charm of the movie. It was supposed to be funny, but I did not find it funny. Like, I don't think I ever laughed, to be honest. I don't know. I found the situations it ended up in, like, just kind of monotonous and stressful and just kind of, like, annoying, I guess. And the characters are just flat and, yeah, not super interesting. The only thing I got out of this book is that building a house is very difficult, and there's just a lot more to it and a lot of problems you can run into that I didn't realize before. So I guess if I ever find myself in that situation, I shall remember this story and the warnings it holds. But I just didn't get anything else out of it, and it's not a long book, and it was a drag to read. Yeah, so I hate saying that, but this is a book, and I rarely give books 2 stars, gotta be honest. But I just didn't enjoy this, so I don't recommend this one, I'm afraid to say. But if you like old movies, like the old movie is really cute, so if you like old black and white movies, go check it out. It's of the same name, Mr. Blandings Builds His Dream House. Yeah, so that's all I have to say about that. Now, the 5th and final book I read in November, which I actually just finished this morning, is Carrion, Jeeves by P.G. Wodehouse, and this was published in 1925, and when I actually write a review, I will give it 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. So, this is part of a series called the Jeeves and Wooster series. I don't think you need to read them all. I don't think there's like some overarching plot that you really need to get in on. But I've decided to generally try to read as many as I'm interested in. So this is the second time reading a Jeeves and Wooster book, and I'm really enjoying it so far. So this is like a comic series, and P.G. Wodehouse is just known as like one of the greatest comic writers, and it's just lots of fun. So I enjoyed this after Mr. Blandings builds his dream house because that was not funny, but it was supposed to be. And this was very funny, very enjoyable. Um, so it follows pretty much this man named Bertie Wooster, and you know, he's kind of this wealthy layabout or something. And he doesn't really do much, but he's like a good-natured fellow, and doesn't have much to do in life, and he has a butler, or I guess it's like a gentleman of a valet, named Jeeves, and Bertie gets into lots of scrapes, and so do his friends, and Jeeves always gets them out of them. Yeah, and so it's just this like upper class British humor, and it's just lots of fun. So this is a short story collection. They kind of in the series they kind of start out as short story collections, and then they evolve into novels. So I at least want to read till I get to the novels, to see what that's like and see if I want to read them all or whether I feel like I've read enough or whatnot. So of course, like I didn't adore every single story in here, but you know, I had a good time reading this. I was laughing a lot. Um, it's just the way certain things are worded that are just so funny and just very hilarious and very uppity. I don't know. And just the lingo they use is even funny. Like they always say like rummy um, and cove, and I don't know what else do they say. I don't know. They just have like their own little like lingo of the time that I feel like I've only come across in the Jeeves and Wooster books. So very enjoyable, very funny. Jeeves is wonderful. Bertie is just hilarious, and his perspective is hilarious. Most of these are from Bertie's perspective, but actually the last one was from Jeeves' perspective, which was kind of different and fun. Um, yeah, I almost wish I had written down like little passages that were super funny in this, but maybe you just like need to read it all to really get the comedy of the situations. But very enjoyable. I don't usually read comic books. That's like not like comic books, but books that are them comedy within them. Um, it's not usually something I'm drawn to, but like it's always nice to have a good laugh, and these are really wonderful. Um, so these books remind me of like the importance of being earnest meets Downton Abbey, like the funny parts of Downton Abbey. Like if you watch Downton Abbey, like there's some things people say that are like quite funny. Like the series isn't like a humorous overall, but there are actually some quite funny things that people say. So you mix like those parts with like the importance of being earnest, and somehow you get like Jeeves and Wooster. So if you like that sort of thing, that's what these are kind of like. And yeah, if you had read Jeeves and Wooster before, but not this collection, this one was quite funny and enjoyable, and I would recommend it. So I'm trying to read a Jeeves and Wooster every 6 months because I don't know, it sounded like a good plan to me. So you can look out, you know, for 2 more next year. So yeah. This is like kind of a random side note, but maybe it would help some of you. So I was bummed when I got this book. I got this used, and it smelled horribly of cigars, which is kind of annoying that like I got sold. I got this online at eBooks, and so it's kind of annoying that they sold me books that smell really grossly of cigars, but that's okay. So, I like could not stand it. So I looked up what to do, and this was a really good idea. So if any of you ever have this problem coming across a smelly used book, I recommend doing this. So I took dryer sheets and like wrapped the outside of it in it, and then put like dryer sheets in the pages, and then I like sealed it in a Ziploc bag and like left it for like a week or two or something. And now it smells really good. I mean, it smells like laundry, which is kind of weird, but much better than cigars. So I don't know. I know that's really random, but if any of you ever have that problem, it worked. So I recommend that. Anyway, so those are all the books I read in November. I hope you enjoyed this video and these reviews. If you have anything to say, if you've read any of these books, or have thought of something you would like to recommend to me, please feel free to comment below. I will link my Tumblr and Goodreads as usual, where I post written reviews and quotes, things like that. I do write written reviews for all the books I read, so if you want like more in-depth or written review of any of these, you can find those there. I will also link my Patreon account in case you feel like supporting me, which is always welcome. I think I have a couple Patreons right now, so lots of thanks to you guys. I just appreciate the kindness and the gesture, so very much appreciated. Anyways, I shall see you next month, so have a wonderful December and Christmas time. Bye, everyone.